Well, that escalated quickly. But before things really get out of hand, let's first try to understand what pushed the Trump administration to pull the trigger and hit Iran's three key nuclear sites. Apologies that this will be fast, but as you may have gathered, I am at The Hague for the NATO Heads of State Summit. It's going to be a busy day tomorrow, and I really should get some sleep. But at least we will have interesting people to talk to soon. For now, though, I want to look at four things. First, the basic logic of preventive action, both from the perspective of lines on maps and the nuclear facilities that are no longer on the map, the limited window that the Trump administration had to act, the problem with negotiating over the centrifuges critical to Iran's program, and the estimates of the costs that the United States will suffer as a consequence. But we begin with the preventive war logic. And goodness, I have been talking about this non-stop for the last week, so let me review the basic logic as fast as possible. After Iran acquires nuclear weapons, Iran will have greater coercive leverage in the region. However, if the US-Israeli coalition steps in now, they can try to hold down Iran's strength at the current balance of power. Sometimes that is better than the long-term consequences, hence war. Specifically, the United States targeted three sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Fordow and Natanz specialized in using centrifuges to produce highly enriched uranium that fuels nuclear bombs, like those that you see here. Meanwhile, Isfahan converted solid uranium to a gas, which is what you need for those centrifuges to spin around properly and produce the highly enriched uranium. We will have to wait for a full damage assessment to understand the exact consequences of the strikes. But assuming that those sites have been hit hard, we are looking at years of setback to Iran's program. In other words, the current line is staying where it is for a while. A couple of caveats to that, though. First, in the short run, Iran had a sizable supply of highly enriched uranium before the attack, believed to be below the threshold of weapons grade. We do not know where that supply is. Iran claims that it had moved it from the Fordow site well before the strikes, but again, we do not know. That supply may very well be buried deep under a bunch of rocks at this point. However, it is worth pointing out that if the actual level of enrichment was higher than believed, and Iran moved the supply off-site, then rebuilding those facilities is superfluous to having some number of nuclear weapons. It would just be a matter of configuring the uranium metal into a bomb, which is not all that hard to do. Second, the longer-term point is that Iran still retains the technical knowledge to rebuild the facilities. Then again, the ability to do things is different than actually doing them, and Iran's decision could break in a couple of different ways here. One way is that Iran reluctantly receives the message that trying to rebuild its program is futile, and that era of the coercive bargaining relationship fades into the background. The other way is that Iran tries to do it again, in even better protected and more secretive locations. That would put the onus on US and Israeli intelligence to constantly stay alert, to locate and then destroy new targets as they arise. That, of course, means maintaining constant air superiority, which in turn means a continued air campaign, and questions about the finances and political will to do so in the Israeli and American homelands. Now I want to pivot from the what to the why, exploring the Trump administration's thought process here. And we should go beyond the now widely discussed idea that Israel had essentially set the table for the United States, doing everything that was necessary to hamstring Iran's program, except for what only bunker-busting bombs could touch, and then waiting for the Trump administration to drop 12 of them on Fordow, 2 on Natanz, and some additional missile damage to Isfahan. Yes, it is true that Israel absorbed most of the risk of the strike by taking out Iran's air defenses. But the thing is, you could still negotiate a resolution to the situation after that point. Power is only shifting because Iran is working on a nuclear program, or at least it would seem. halt the progress on building the bomb, and ostensibly the problem goes away. Well, not so fast. The hang-up on Washington's end here is that you still have to negotiate based on the relative capabilities on both ends. How far Iran has gone toward building a bomb, and how easily the United States could disable the program. And the latter presented an issue here. It is reasonable to think that the United States had a short window to cripple Iran's program. If, for example, you think that Iran would rebuild its air defenses after Israel had taken them out, then the United States may not get this opportunity again. In turn, Iran would have greater bargaining power in the future and want to exploit it. Consequently, the United States had to act while it could. This is roughly akin to the bargaining problem that Ukraine and Russia are experiencing right now. Oh yeah, remember how there is a war still going on in Europe? If Russia stops, Ukraine gets the opportunity to fortify its front lines, and that immediately shifts the balance of power between them. That, in turn, limits what types of settlements that the Kremlin would want to enter into now. The fun of having one power shift layered onto another. Moving on, there is a second bargaining issue here that is central to nuclear proliferation more generally. I cited these centrifuges as the infrastructure needed to fuel a nuclear weapon. Well, it turns out that this is the exact same equipment that one would need to construct a civilian nuclear energy program. It is just a matter of how much that you spin the centrifuges. I need not tell you that Donald Trump did not want Iran to have a single centrifuge. Don't have to worry about the number of spins if there is nothing to spin. However, no centrifuges would also mean that Iran would have nothing to fuel its nuclear power plants. Thus, bargaining over power here destroys some of the value that the parties would otherwise enjoy. Iran compromising on centrifuges does not suddenly mean that the United States has a ton more electricity. Rather, the value just vanishes. That creates a bigger problem for negotiations. Remember, under normal circumstances, the reason that bargaining should work is that war is inefficient. Well, here, peace is also inefficient to some degree. The way that countries normally sidestep this problem is by having a third party import low-enriched uranium to the would-be nuclear proliferator. Iran, in this instance, would still be able to operate its nuclear reactors to create electricity, but it could not use the low-enriched uranium to build a nuclear weapon. Indeed, to get anywhere, it would still need those centrifuges to further enrich the uranium, or it would have to master an entirely different system to separate fissile plutonium from spent uranium. Nonetheless, a couple of further issues remain here. One, you need a country to give the low-enriched uranium. Given current geopolitical alignments, Russia would be a sensible candidate for Iran. Two, you need a certain level of trust between the would-be proliferator and the supplier. Nuclear power plants are incredibly capital-intensive to build, but produce very cheap electricity per kilowatt. High fixed costs, low marginal costs. But that gives incredible leverage to the supplier. It can cut shipments of low-enriched uranium and inflict massive economic damage. The fact that Iran had been reluctant to negotiate on this point might say something about the relationship between Moscow and Tehran, though so many other things are going on here that you might not want to read into that specific point. As a final topic for today, the fact that Trump followed through with the strikes gives us a hint that he believes that the United States can contain the damage in the aftermath. No tacos here. It is hard to imagine that the United States will avoid any repercussions whatsoever, but Trump still followed through. The big things to watch out for are attacks on U.S. bases in the region, attempts to shut down shipping along the Strait of Hormuz, and some longer-term threats of unconventional attacks on the U.S. homeland. Meanwhile, the Houthis, an Iranian proxy, have already sworn to retaliate along the Bab el-Mandab Strait. However, we will have to wait to see if they have the capacity to do so right now, coming off of the U.S. operations in the region. The U.S. outlook should be more optimistic here. In contrast, it will be difficult to stop Iran from using any of the other options to hurt the United States to some degree. Rather, Washington's plan seems to be to leave a whole bunch of assets in the region, and threaten further strikes if Iran tried to retaliate. Tehran now finds itself at a fork in the road, and it will now determine whether the conflict continues, and it risks further strikes from the United States. Okay, time for me to get some sleep. Leave your questions in the comments, and I might get to them over on Lines on Maps Extra, hopefully tomorrow. Meanwhile, if you are interested in World War III starting, well, that is poor phrasing, but go ahead and watch this video to learn how one might stop that. And if you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.